Fabrice, good to chat with you on this. What's at stake today as UK reopens?
So listen, you framed it really well in the comment we just heard. A lot of excess saving that might or might not be spent. A lot of uncertainty on some shops having reopened, others not. A lot of people out, either just curious or actually shopping. The thing, there are a couple of things we do know, and I think we should highlight that in contrast to any point last year, the UK is this time around recovering in a safe situation when it comes from a public health situation, right? And what we know from countries last year who have reopened against a safe public health backdrop is that the recovery can be really forceful. What we should, however, keep in mind and be mindful of is that the restrictions are only removed gradually, right? We're talking a lot about shops today and pubs, but it's only some parts of restaurants and pubs, right? Some restrictions still remain on hospitality, travels. So we will have plenty of opportunities to continue to talk about that and to see how it evolves in the course of the next couple of months, right?
Fabrice, can you talk me through your thinking about how much of the 180 billion, circa 180 billion, is going to be spent? The furlough scheme is still on. That's going to help people's confidence in terms of their jobs. We know that probably we're going to be spending less on holidays this year. I'm just really curious about the kind of calculations that you've tried to do to work out how much of this is going to be spent. Because as Andy Haldane has pointed out, the chief economist at the Bank of England, this is kind of where everything comes really through for the UK economy. If a lot is spent, the UK economy is going to roar out of this recession.
Yes, you're right. Listen, I think the first thing to keep in mind is that you don't need to spend your savings accumulated last year for consumption to rebound very strongly. It's enough for households to spend in line with their income to see double-digit growth numbers in consumption in the course of the next couple of quarters, right? So that's the first leg of the recovery. You normalize how much you spend in relation to your income. The question then becomes whether you want to spend more than that, in which case you will have to dip in the savings that have been parked on some saving vehicle already since last year. And then the question becomes, how do households usually spend their wealth, and whether or not, households are willing to spend in excess of what they usually do. I mean, you mentioned hairdressers earlier. Well, that's a case where you can't really make up for missing a hairdresser by going twice to the hairdresser. So there are a whole bunch of services where it's difficult to catch up demand. Unless my boss gives me more holidays, I will not be able to travel more, even when traveling reopens. So here again, so we are facing sectors where catch-up demand is not easy. Restaurants, entertainment, hospitalities, and a lot of services. We know from goods, for instance, goods consumption, that households are already overspending on goods. That substitution had worked really well in the course of last year. So, whenever you're trying to unpick, how much that can be spent, you might want to be rather on the cautious side. And you mentioned Andy Haldane. Well, he's chief economist of the Bank of England, as you know. And when he's asked to put a number on that, he concludes on 5% of those excess savings being spent. And that's really not much, right? So I think it's fair to say that there are reasons to be hopeful. There are also a lot of reasons to be cautious.
So, Fabrice, when are we going to know what it's going to be? Like, how many quarters do you have to wait until we say, okay, this is now the trajectory for the UK?
So, listen, the second quarter we will continue to see a lot of restrictions in the second quarter. I mean, restrictions on some hospitality, entertainment, restaurants, traveling. So clearly during all these months, even if you want to spend in those areas, you will not be able to do so. We also know, by looking at credit card spending or these kind of indicators, that for some sectors, and you have been reporting on the high street, that these sectors react very quickly. So we might be in a position already next week. At Barclays, we follow what we call spend trend signals, and we get them with a week delay. So we'll kind of already know next week whether households are spending in excess of what they usually do. So, we'll get the first indications within a week or two, a month or two, but the national accounts, as you know, they come with 6 weeks delay at the end of the month. So unfortunately, that's a discussion for the second half
Fabrice,
of this year. Yeah.
We mentioned holidays just a moment ago, and as you say, that kind of demand from last year is gone. But the UK is making it, by the sounds of things, and we're still yet to get the final details, it's going to make it quite hard for people to travel. Does that money get saved, or does that money get spent? Does that money stay in the United Kingdom? Does it get spent on staycations? Do staycations generate as much? I'm just curious about the dynamics of restricting people's holidays once again in terms of the impact on the UK economy.
Listen, that's a good question, but as long as there's no travel by plane involved, you already spend less going from point A to point B. The question on the type of accommodation that you want to stay at, it might also be different whenever you think of staying in your home country as opposed to going abroad. So unfortunately, it's not like we have any precedent to know how people will behave. And as much as, I mentioned you need more holidays, but that's not completely true. You can spend more by going in more expensive hotels or restaurants. So all this is a little bit up in the air. But let's, ask yourself the question whether you're ready to spend whatever's on your saving account in holidays or restaurants. The answer is yes. But the answer is also not all of it. You will spend a fraction. So it's fair to assume that, people will indulge themselves into higher spending because we just went through a very harsh time, and that will happen. But it's nowhere near those 180 billion that we've been talking about, right? That usually gets saved. That's the reality of, excess saving, unfortunately.